It would all start at Survivor Series. Kevin Owens had just lost his WWE Tag Team Championship after some controversial actions from his partner, Rey Mysterio, who was under the contract of Dave Bautista. Kevin Owens will remain silent, but he was not the only one who had faced a hard loss on that night. Daniel Bryan's motley crew of War Machine and Cedric Alexander were bested by Randy Orton, Eric Rowan, Bo Cephas, and the demonic entity, The Fiend, in a traditional Survivor Series match. The next SmackDown, Daniel Bryan and Rey Mysterio would step into the ring in a one-on-one match to kick off the new season, but that would be interrupted by The Fiend attacking Daniel Bryan and showing that Bray Wyatt was not done with him. But out of nowhere, the lights would go out again. And when they rose up again, Johnny Gargano would come to the aid of Daniel Bryan, holding off The Fiend until he retreated. And that was when many would say was the turning point in Daniel Bryan's sanity. The next week, Kevin Owens would break his silence about the attack. Kevin Owens was angry, but understood that Rey Mysterio did not want to do what he did to Kevin, but he was forced to. Kevin Owens simply did not want to fight Rey Mysterio, yet he wanted to face Bautista. The match was made in 2 weeks' time, and flashed 2 weeks later, and Daniel Bryan would also return into in-ring action against new-coming behemoth Jackson Ryker in a losing effort, but it seemed as if Daniel Bryan was not even affected by The Fiend's influence. But the huge moment would come at the end of the evening where Kevin Owens would face Bautista to close out SmackDown. Kevin Owens and Bautista had a grueling contest, which ended with Kevin Owens giving Bautista a powerbomb onto the apron, which was followed up with a package piledriver. After the match, the World Heavyweight Champion Braun Strowman would come out and attack Kevin Owens, and then dropping the news that Kevin Owens will be Braun Strowman's opponent at the next pay-per-view, the Royal Rumble. Daniel Bryan would remain in the shadows once again, but Kevin Owens would have a main event caliber matchup against Finn Balor in one of SmackDown's most competitive matchups in this series. He would win after a pop-up powerbomb, hyping up his momentum on the road to WrestleMania and his World Heavyweight Championship match. Daniel Bryan would show up next week on SmackDown, but in an odd aggressive way to his longtime rival Randy Orton. But we had no clue what was in store for us, or Daniel Bryan, until we found out that Daniel Bryan would be teaming up with Johnny Gargano in a handicap match against The Fiend next week on SmackDown. Next week, Kevin Owens would be shooting an interview before the show with Michael Cole, and somehow Braun Strowman's mind games were just getting worse and worse. Kevin Owens would try to find Braun Strowman to no avail, but later that night was the handicap match. Johnny Gargano would make his entrance, and then the lights were cut. And when they returned back on, a hooded figure with a Singapore cane would attack Johnny Gargano, and the figure would shockingly be Gargano's friend, Daniel Bryan. This was the new Daniel Bryan, and we were all unnerved by the possibility that The Fiend had changed it. And that was cause for management to create a matchup between Bryan and Gargano. But on the other side of things, Kevin Owens was finally getting his hands on Braun Strowman that night, and after being put through a barricade and an announce table, Kevin Owens would deliver a package piledriver onto the concrete to Braun Strowman. Kevin Owens would then shock all of Philadelphia when he stepped into the ring against Braun Strowman at Royal Rumble, when he defeated Braun Strowman to win the World Heavyweight Championship. Later that night, Daniel Bryan would enter the Royal Rumble at number 30. We would be moving over to the SmackDown the next week, where after learning of the news that SmackDown superstar Finn Balor had won the Royal Rumble and was challenging the WWE Champion on Raw, SmackDown was left without a challenger for the World Heavyweight Championship at WrestleMania. Enter the Breaking Point Death Match. Daniel Bryan and Johnny Gargano's match was changed to a qualifying matchup for No Way Out, and all of the cards were on the table. Daniel Bryan would defeat Johnny Gargano after using a move that he had used in his past, the cattle mutilation, and Daniel Bryan was the second man in the Breaking Point Deathmatch. Kevin Owens would finally get some closure after Rey Mysterio became the number one contender for his World Heavyweight Championship, defeating Bautista in an I Quit match, and also retiring Bautista at the same time. Making Bautista say "I quit" after a package piledriver onto the exposed wood of the ring mat would cement Kevin Owens' next challenger at No Way Out, and that was Rey Mysterio. Flash No Way Out, and Kevin Owens and Rey Mysterio will put on one of the most competitive matchups for the World Heavyweight title's history, and would also end after Kevin Owens delivered a powerbomb onto the apron, but instead of a package piledriver, Rey Mysterio was spared and delivered a pop-up powerbomb, and Kevin Owens would etch his name into the WrestleMania main event. But that night, 6 men were pushed to the breaking point, Daniel Bryan would gain first blood after throwing Jackson Riker off of a production truck, rendering him unable to compete. As the match continued, Kyle O'Reilly tapped out to Randy Orton, Gulak would be knocked out by a punt kick from Randy Orton, and in a shocking twist, Daniel Bryan and Johnny Gargano would have a temporary alliance against Randy Orton, where Gargano would make Orton tap to the Gargano escape. But it was Daniel Bryan who would ultimately pick up the victory after locking cattle mutilation in on Johnny Gargano, and Gargano was pushed to his breaking point, and Daniel Bryan would earn his world title match at WrestleMania. The next night, Daniel Bryan would open the show and openly reject the idea of Kevin Owens being the World Heavyweight Champion, which would cause Kevin Owens to share some words of his own, basically painting Daniel Bryan as a hypocrite. As a man who used to tell everyone to fight for your dreams, it seems as if his selfishness was too much to bear, and the true colors of Daniel Bryan would show. After an impromptu match against newcomer Dominik Dijakovic in a losing effort, next week Daniel Bryan delivered a passionate and threatening message to Kevin Owens, guaranteeing that Daniel Bryan walks out of WrestleMania the World Heavyweight Champion. The next week after that, Drew Gulak would win the main event against Dominik Dijakovic, and Daniel Bryan would appear and attack Drew Gulak for no good reason, and would also attack Tyler Breeze, who had came to Gulak's rescue. But then Kevin Owens' music would hit, and Kevin Owens would begin the war with the first battle. Both men exchanged strikes and maneuvers back and forth, which would ultimately end with them being broken up by the referees and WWE producers before the broadcast was cut. But it wouldn't end there, as Kevin Owens and Daniel Bryan would come to blows the very next week, but instead, it would be Daniel Bryan who would get the upper hand and stand tall in the middle of the ring, holding up Kevin Owens' World Heavyweight Championship and proving to everyone that Daniel Bryan is dead.